Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon for the webinar on the Mosaic Value and Cost Informed Planning in Transportation. I thought I'd give everybody a couple minutes to join yet, but while we're waiting, we could take care of a few housekeeping items. All attendees are muted right now except for the panelists who will be speaking today. We'll take questions at the end of the presentation, but you can submit your questions at any point during the presentation by typing them into the question box or chat window. If for some reason you don't see the chat box or question box, you can click on the orange arrow at the top right of your screen and the chat box should appear. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website by the end of the day today or Wednesday morning. Please visit our website at ssti.us to access the webinar. For those who are not familiar with SSTI, I want to give you all a brief overview. We're a network of reform-oriented state departments of transportation, and we're founded in 2010. We're housed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We work in three primary ways. As a community of practice where participating departments of transportation can learn together and share experiences as they implement innovative and smart transportation policies. Currently, we have approximately 20 partnering state departments of transportation. We also work as a resource of direct technical assistance to the agencies on transformative and replicable smart transportation reform efforts, and also as a resource to the broader transportation community, including local, state, and federal agencies in their efforts to reorient practice to changing social and financial demands. I invite you to look for more information on our work at our website, ssti.us. There you can take advantage of the resources available on our site, including past webinars, newsletters, and reports on a variety of transportation topics. I'm going to give a brief topic introduction before we launch into the presentations, just to help set the context. As transportation agencies are broadening their mission statements and long-range plans to focus on issues such as livability, sustainability, equity, and economic vitality, in addition to their historical focus on mobility, Mosaic offers transportation planners and decision makers an efficient, transparent way to evaluate the social, environmental, and economic costs of benefits of transportation programs and investments, including roadways, transit, and transportation demand management and active transportation. We have two great speakers today. Eric Havig has over 25 years of experience with the Oregon Department of Transportation. He first started through the graduate engineer program, completing rotations in construction, traffic design, and location design. He's worked in multiple capacities through his career, including geometric design, traffic analysis, access management, maintenance engineering, development review, planning, and policy. From 2002 to 2010, Eric served as the Region 2 Planning and Development Manager, responsible for planning, local government, and development review programs and functions. For the past 4 years, Eric has served as the Planning Section Manager for the Transportation Development Division at Oregon DOT. In this role, Eric has been responsible for leading the section in development of long-range policy, policy interpretation and implementation, development of guidance documents and standards of practice, as well as Transportation Growth Management Program, Connect Oregon, and statewide modeling and analysis programs. Eric is a registered professional engineer with extensive experience in planning policy and implementation, as well as project delivery for both state and locally administered projects. Sam Suskin is a North American Transportation Planning Director at CH2MHILL. For more than 30 years, he has worked with state, local, national, and international organizations on projects and plans that integrate transportation, smart growth, sustainable development. He has directed numerous transportation guidance documents for the Transportation Research Board of the National Academy of Sciences. He currently leads the firm's efforts in the development of Green Roads, greenroads.us, a set of performance standards used for sustainable roadway design and construction, and is principal for the recently completed Sustainable Highways Initiative for the U.S. Federal Highway Administration. He lives in Portland, Oregon. And on that note, I am going to turn it over to the people you are here to listen to, Sam and Eric. Sam, I am going to turn the keyboard control over to you now. Just give me just a second. Okay.
Thank you. Let's test. Key and see what happens. We're getting there. We're waiting.
Is it
No,
not?
I don't see myself changing slides. I'm pressing the page down key, and I'm not getting any activity.
Okay, let me just do this one more time. Hold on. Okay, you should be okay. If it doesn't work, you can just have me advance.
It's funny. Practice makes perfect most of the time, but may not today. I don't know that there's anything else I need to do other than hit page down if I understand your directions. And
yeah, and that's what we practiced.
Correct. And we're not getting anywhere. So you can advance the slides.
Yeah, I'm just going to advance the slide to the next one, and we'll get started.
Yep.
Sure.
So
there you go. Thank you.
There we go. So thank you for that introduction, Mary, and thanks to SSTI for having us on. And I hope today will be very informative for all those that are attending the webinar. Again, my name is Eric Hovig. I'm with the Oregon Department of Transportation. And back in 2009, our legislative body passed a fairly large transportation package, included some money for projects and investment. But they also included a number of initiatives that they wanted the department to explore for efficiency and decision-making and other areas of policy that were important to them. And one of those areas was around what they termed least cost planning. They wanted the department to take a look to see how we could build the least cost planning principles into transportation and transportation investment decision-making. So the department took this on and brought in Sam with CH2MHILL and also with HDR to work with our stakeholder committee to see how do we try to do this. And the concept around least cost planning really came from the utility sector, at least here in Oregon and other places, to make sure that when we're talking about investment strategies and options, that we're exploring all the various costs and opportunities, benefits, to that decision from both the supply side as well as the demand side of trying to provide services. So the question is, how do you try to do that for transportation and thinking of transportation in similar types of modes? So we came up with the tool that we're going to be talking about today that we think really moves that bar forward as we start to look at and evaluate and value what are the true costs and benefits between choices and options around transportation investments, as well as programs and services to make sure we're covering both the supply and the demand side of transportation. Our advisory committee really kind of helped us move this project forward, and as you can see, Mary, maybe if we go forward a slide.
Not quite sure why.
Yeah, it seems to be frozen solid there.
Yes, it does.
I'll go ahead and keep going. We'll see if we can get the slides moving.
Yes, Sam, give it a try because it says you still have control. And I see your mouse moving on the screen. There we go. You got it.
There we go. So from that legislation, the quote here was, we needed to evaluate and develop a methodology for decision-making at both the planning stage as well as the project state at both the state and regional level for our processes. And what we really found as we worked with our advisory committee is we needed to focus more on the planning realm about how do we make investment strategies in our long-range plans, building in the least cost planning principles. But one of the first things that came from our advisory committee is when we use the term least cost planning, it invoked the concept that we're trying to pick the least cost alternative, which is really not what the legislation was after, but instead it was about how do we choose the best value between the options moving forward. And that's why we renamed this tool Mosaic, so we can get away from the terminology around least cost planning. And then again, as I just mentioned, really focus on those long-range planning activities that we can look across a suite of options, projects and programs and services to evaluate what is the right mixture of things that provides the best value for the amount of money we have available. And that's what led to the development of Mosaic. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sam. And Sam, again, was with CH2MHILL. And Sam was really the project manager in helping the department, Oregon Department of Transportation, lead this forward in developing this tool. So I'm going to let him kind of walk through the inner workings and setup.
Thank you, Eric. So before we get serious, I'll have a little levity, I hope, with all of you. We have some questions that we often ask ourselves when we talk about Mosaic, which is, who is it who makes transportation decisions? How do we make those decisions? And are we happy with the way those decisions are made? So really, the first question is it really true that engineers are divine? Are they in fact all-knowing? Do they have all the answers to the questions that matter to our stakeholders when we make transportation investments? You can answer that question for yourselves. The second question is, are planners prophets? Well, what we mean by that is, are they the kind of people who walk around and say, the end is near, we have to change everything that we do? Are they the kind of people that always have the answer no matter what the question is? Well, you see, I'm stereotyping both engineers and planners, but unfortunately in the decision-making world, these stereotypes sometimes come up, and all we have to do is take a hard look at the way we make decisions and recognize that it isn't so, but we do live with these stereotypes. One last question for you, and that is, does technology really answer life's big questions? Is there really a black box that gives the answers to all the issues that are associated with making investment decisions in transportation? And we're pretty sure the answer to that is no. And even though sometimes people, when they hear us talk about Mosaic, think of it as a black box, it really, I hope we can persuade you, it's really quite the opposite by the time we're done with this presentation. So Mosaic is both a tool and a process, and it fits into the central part of the transportation planning process. It fits in after a region or a state has developed its goals and objectives for their plan, has a good sense of existing conditions, and has a forecast or future baseline conditions. So then at this point, Mosaic is ideal for the second and third steps of the process, in which stakeholders, and those could be parts of an agency, departments or divisions within an agency, as well as external stakeholders representing constituencies that are active in the region or the state. They develop a list of solutions, they screen and evaluate them, and they recommend a set of projects or alternatives to move forward into implementation. Step 4, of course, is the adoption of a transportation system plan, a TSP, or a regional transportation plan or a state transportation plan. So Mosaic fits into the middle of the transportation planning process. And it helps agencies evaluate solutions and make better recommendations. Mosaic, the tool, uses a set of linked spreadsheets. And the reason we chose the name Mosaic is that we think it represents a way of thinking about the elements, the pieces that make up a picture, the pieces of value that together constitute the best value, the best bundle of investments that can be chosen by stakeholders. So there's a series of linked spreadsheets programmed in Excel, in and through Excel and Visual Basic. It's an open source code and something that can be adapted, and we have ourselves adapted it a number of times. And we use it to measure value, as Eric said, in 2 different ways. First of all, we measure value in dollars. Now, benefit cost analysis as a decision-making tool has been around for decades, not only in transportation, but in many, many industries and sectors in our economy and society. What we think we have done with Mosaic is to push the envelope by including the latest and best methods for measuring the value or the benefits and costs associated with transportation investment. And you'll see some of those examples shortly. It also measures value in ways that are informed by stakeholders. What we mean by this is that in many cases, everyone agrees that value cannot always be measured in dollars for everything that matters to stakeholders when they're making investment decisions. And so Mosaic incorporates these two approaches to measuring value, and in fact offers parallel measures of value, which enrich the discussion and eventually lead, we think, to better informed decisions.
And Sam, I think it's also important to note on that particular slide that there's some of those categories that feed into both processes, that sometimes within a category we can monetize particular interests in values, and in others we can't. And so sometimes it'll feed into both parts of the equation. And that's okay, as Sam will walk through.
Exactly, Eric. Now those icons across the bottom of the screen are the place where I hope I can pick up with you. And I'm having some trouble changing the slide here. Let me, I don't know whether it's my computer or what the problem is, but now it's jumping around. It's doing all kinds of things for me here. I'm going to go back a little bit here.
Do you just want me to go ahead and advance the slide so you don't have to?
I'd be happy if you would, because either my computer keys are sticking or there's some data transmission problems here. But we need to go back at least one, I think 2 slides now.
All right. Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay. Huh. Let's see. There we go. Back more?
Okay, go back one more. Okay, stop. There we go. Boy, that really started jumping. Okay, so the icons that you saw on the previous slide are better explained in this slide. Mosaic has a set of what we call categories. These would be overall goals that we think are essentially universal in transportation planning. They are typical of the vast majority of the goals that are used for decision making. You see them displayed here. I don't need to read them to you. Within these categories or goals, there are a series of objectives. We call them indicators. And the indicators are the things that we're actually measuring within these categories. Next slide, please. Now, I want to remind you that what we've done and what I'm going to show you today is a test. We spent well over a year developing the framework, the decision-making framework, and programming the Excel tool. And then we spent a year with a test committee in the greater Portland metropolitan area testing Mosaic itself. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to show you are the results of these tests and just briefly give you an idea of what we call bundles. You might call them investment packages. You might call them alternatives. You might call them scenarios that we used. And our goal in doing this wasn't to try to make a real decision. In fact, it was explicitly around testing the tool. It was around trying to make sure that we could see the indicators producing the kinds of impacts that we expected given the way we programmed it. So we created bundles that were modal in their emphasis. That's not typical of a state transportation plan or a metropolitan transportation plan, but it was appropriate here. So we had a roadway bundle with some freeway improvements, some expressway improvements, and some urban arterial improvements. Next slide. Bundle A, by the way, was the future base case. So the Bundle B was a roadway package. Bundle C was a transit package, which included bus rapid transit, light rail extensions, service improvements, and importantly, a decrease in transit fares experienced by the user of 50%. Next bundle, please. And Bundle D consisted of the active transportation programs, an emphasis on the management of vehicular demand, investments in infrastructure that supports walking and cycling, the conversion of a freeway lane to an HLV lane, and the introduction of a variety of specific demand management programs, which are shown on this slide. And again, our goal was to test the tool itself. And so we included a variety of programs in this for that purpose. Next slide, please.
Well, and Sam, just before you move on, again, just want to reiterate that this was done purposely to set these bundles up explicitly along maybe modal lines for our test purposes. We're not suggesting this is how you may want to use that for how you actually come up with your bundles of potential programs and projects and actions. But this is, again, from a test that start to understand the sensitivity of the tool and the process as well. So this was done explicitly for the test to set these things up this way.
Exactly. And to build on that, Eric, let me state what Mosaic is designed to do. It's designed to evaluate multimodal bundles. By bundles, we mean combinations of capital investments and programs. Both of those things would apply. This could be done, again, through an MPO at a regional transportation plan level or any other geography, a city, an urban county, anywhere where there's enough variety in the options available to make the application and calibration of the tool worthwhile. It can also be done in a lengthy or very complex corridor environment where there might be a number of different segments and might be different solutions available for different segments. So again, as long as there's enough complexity to the choices that you want to evaluate and compare, Mosaic offers you a framework for doing that. So I want to give you a sense of the kinds of things you can learn from using Mosaic. And what you see here, we refer to MODA. This is the multi-objective decision analysis framework. What we're speaking of here is a process by which stakeholders can assign weights to the different categories. Categories is another way of saying goals. And by assigning a weight, see how that weight affects the overall value generated by a bundle of investments. And the weighting process is really designed to address those situations, and I'm sure you never have them, of course, when it's really difficult to get people to agree on what the package ought to be. Because if it were easy to agree, we wouldn't be developing tools like this. All of you come from backgrounds, I'm sure, where you've had to work for many weeks or months or years with stakeholders to get the consensus you need to advance your plan. And it's largely because each stakeholder or a group of stakeholders has a point of view. They have a set of values which they think are the most important ones. Sometimes those are broad values, sometimes they're very narrow values, sometimes it fits in one category, sometimes it fits in several. But the intent, of course, in your stakeholder involvement is to bring all of those different people to the table. And so what Mosaic does is simplifies and enriches the process of seeing the effects of providing those different weights to the different value sets that stakeholders bring. So here, looking at these hypothetical bundles, again, with a modal emphasis in this pilot test, what we basically can see is how much value, given the importance that stakeholders put on these different categories, how much value each bundle brings at the end of the day. And this scale is on a 0 to 10 scale. And what you basically see, and it's all we'll need to say for the moment, is that, gee, all of these bundles bring roughly the same overall value. But what you also can see here, when you look at the color coding, which I hope is coming across on your screen sufficiently, you see that the mix of value is different in each bundle. So the roadway bundle, for example, has a very high value that comes from the weight that people put on safety. And the safety benefits, the contribution that safety makes to the roadway bundle, is proportionally greater than it is in the case of transit and active transportation. And we could point out examples where the opposite might, or something else might be true. So in active transportation, for example, the biggest component of value that comes from this weighting exercise comes from the quality of life category. And when we look inside that, and you'll see this later, the quality of life category is in part, or maybe large part, driven by the health benefits of active transportation, which we in fact have monetized, but we can also weight as a stakeholder preference. So we'll be able to do both those things. Next slide, please. So my goal there is merely to say, when you look at value as measured by the preferences and weights that stakeholders bring to the bundles, you get one set of outcomes, and it becomes very difficult to decide based on that alone. Here's an example of what we can see when we look at the monetized benefits and costs, or benefits and disbenefits of the transportation bundles. Again, remember, this is a pilot. These results are merely illustrative, but we see two things going on. Number one, there are different levels of benefits. The bundles begin to sort themselves out. And again, for those of you who dwell in the world of roadway capacity, please understand the projects that we put in this bundle were for test purposes only. They weren't necessarily the best, and they certainly weren't the only projects. The intent merely was to test the tool. So again, the point now is to see that when we look at the effects of monetizing many of these benefits and costs, we begin to see some differences. And we also can see that the composition of the benefits, the categories that contribute the most to the monetized benefits, also vary very much across bundles. So again, on this graphic, you can see that economic vitality, which is shown in a green color on the left-hand bar, is a very important contributor to the roadway benefits, a much smaller contributor to the transit and active transportation benefits. And conversely, again, the quality of life contribution, which is largely in the way of increased longevity and reductions in disease associated with active transportation, is a big contributor to that bundle. Again, our goal here isn't to compare across them in absolute terms, but merely to see that the composition of these is very different, and very different than what you got when you gave people the chance to weight those categories themselves. So the monetized benefits, the composition of the monetized benefits looks very different. And we found that that's a very important insight into decision making and leads to some very important discussions. Next slide, please. So again, what we can see here is when we further add a comparison of benefits to costs, and these are monetized benefits compared to money costs, we find that the bundles do sort themselves out. And consistent with the overall initial principle of the least cost planning legislation, this particular pilot, which again is merely illustrative, certainly gives some evidence that active transportation and programs represents a very efficient or a very valuable investment. It isn't, of course, fully scalable. It can't, of course, solve every and all transportation problem. But as a freestanding bundle of investment program options, it, in this illustration, certainly shows that there's a great deal of value. Next slide. We've got a series of other slides which I'm going to move through rather quickly because these may confuse you as much as they help you, but I want to give you a sense of how the tool itself provides information that may inform decision making. So this graphic compares the benefit cost ratio on the horizontal axis to the, if you will, stated preferences, the result of weighting the impacts that stakeholders can make themselves across the different bundles. And what we basically see is a combination of what you saw before. The MODA scores, the weighted preference scores for the three bundles look pretty similar, but the benefit cost ratio looks very different, with active transportation displaying a great deal of monetized net benefits. Next slide. Okay, I think we're going to move along here to save some time. Why don't we click one more? And one more. Okay, so I'll dwell on a couple more graphics, and thank you for your patience. These can be difficult to read and certainly difficult to interpret, but what we show here goes another level down into the composition of the value of each of the bundles that we tested. And we've gone from looking at the categories of impacts, there were 9 categories, to looking in this slide at each of the indicators which we monetize. I think there are 15 or 17 different indicators, 17 different indicators within 9 different categories. So when we say let's monetize everything that good science permits, what we find is we have an opportunity to see here where the value lies, where the benefits lie and where the disbenefits lie. So for example, in the roadway bundle, the big blue segment of that bar is travel time savings. And when we monetize the benefits of roadway investments, time and time again, travel time savings prove to be the most significant contributor to the benefits of roadway investments. We can also see, just above the blue, the green, which is the economic development benefits associated with roadway investments. These result from the travel time savings that accrue to commercial vehicles in particular. And On the other hand, we actually can see a contributor to the disbenefit side. That's shown below the blue. That color may look like a crimson or something like that on your screen. That's actually the estimated impact of the additional VMT that the travel model suggested was going to be the result of providing additional capacity. And when we monetize the average cost of driving and maintaining and insuring and depreciating an automobile, that represents an increase in cost that shows here as a disbenefit, offsetting some of the monetary benefits that I talked about before. And we can go through the same process for the transit bundle and the active program bundle. Visually, you can see right away that the composition or the components of value are different. So the travel time savings is a much smaller contributor in the active transportation program. It is, however, a meaningful contributor in the transit program as well. And we can explore, and stakeholders actually can explore in detail where the value lies, what's driving that package of investments. And so what happens at that point is you're in a position to say, well, gee, okay, if this program, if this bundle of investments shows this kind of value, what's contributing? Which projects are contributing that value? Are these projects that we might want to highlight and begin to build a hybrid package out of so that we can get the most value, again, with the broadest consensus? Okay, next slide, please.
Well, and Sam, just to build on that, one of the key things from our stakeholder group is how can this tool not be a black box? And you talked about that earlier, and this is one of those key ways to our stakeholders as we were working through this process. The transparency that the process and the tool provides from information and how it informs decision makers is really valuable, so that you really truly understand where are these different values and costs being derived from, what are the driving factors, what are the indicator values, and how do they come about, as well as how does your weighting scheme back to those things that can't be monetized, how does that influence? So you can run sensitivity and alternatives and other things to truly understand how sensitive some of those values and costs are to various scenarios to help inform your decision makers in a transparent way.
Thank you, Eric. That was really a good reminder for me as well to stress for all of you the opportunity to use this information to improve decision making. And the principal ways that occur are as follows. Number one, the opportunity to deconstruct these bundles and say, well, gee, if we care a lot about monetized benefits and costs, what is contributing to that particular bundle on the benefit side and the cost side? What can we learn from that that might let us improve the value of that bundle, or that we might take from that bundle and add to the other bundles? And the second way it enhances decision making is on the non-monetized side. So when we say, well, gee, if we increase the emphasis or the importance of economic development as a fundamental goal of our transportation strategy, and we increase the weight that we give it, and we apply that weight across all three bundles, how does it change the overall performance of the bundle? We often find that for any given value, many times the relative rankings of the bundles don't change that much. On the other hand, there are times when it does change a lot. And then each of those opportunities becomes the way back into the decision process, the way to open up that black box of projects that have been put together for any number of reasons, good, bad, or otherwise, political, technical, scientific, or otherwise, and say, well, gee, is there something that we can do to make this bundle perform better? Or conversely, why is it not performing well? What is it we have to think about taking out because it doesn't seem to offer value, whereas all the other elements of the bundle do? So what we're really doing here is making the public decision-making process into an investment strategy that recognizes that many things can be measured in dollars, but many things cannot, and a strategy that really represents the greatest value for money as well as the greatest value for all the other things that we can't put into money. I won't spend any time on this graphic, this little spider web. it's really another graphical way to depict what I showed you in the last slide. But many people find this useful. Some people look at it and think, oh my gosh, it doesn't help me at all. But the colors there, the red, the green, and the blue represent each of the bundles. And the further out from the center, the dots are for each of these metrics, the more value there is there. So you see travel time savings showing up most beneficial under the blue color, which is the roadway bundle, and so forth around the diagram. Next slide, please. So Eric provided really the right segue for me to try to wrap up and take your questions. And I bet you're trying to change slides right now, right? There we go. We'll get there. We have a website, doesn't everybody? OregonMosaic.org. And we are right in the midst of uploading the final version of the tool, the final version of all the documentation, and so forth. So while you can see today a great deal on that website, by October 31st, you will see the final versions of all of this material. What you'll see when you go there is an introduction to Mosaic written in layman's terms. What you'll see is a user guide and an Excel spreadsheet that you can download. The user guide is lengthy. You'll also see a programs guide, which enables stakeholders to see the range of programs which they might choose to include in one or more of the bundles. And there's a great deal of information in there about those programs. And you'll see a complete set of documentation, including the visual basic coding and so forth, so that for those who want to be able to improve or enhance or otherwise adapt Mosaic to your own situation, it's all available to you. And again, the final version of that will be at the end of this, well, the end of the month. It starts tomorrow. Next slide, please. So to sum up, Mosaic, we think, is, in fact, a new way to evaluate programs. The reason it's new is, first of all, because it enables us to compare and contrast value on both monetary terms and on non-monetary terms. It's designed to inform but not dictate decisions, because we find time and again the more we're able to open up the black box, the more we're able to say what really is going on there, the better the decisions are that result from it. Mosaic is a tool, but it's also a process. And I want to stress to you the importance of that process being led by someone or a team of people whose stakeholders respect and who has the experience to lead and manage and facilitate the kinds of conversations and learnings that you can see can come from this tool. This is not something you do at home. It's not something you do in an evening. It's something that enriches a process which typically goes on over a period of months. And again, I tested and confirmed that as well. And last of all, with your further adaptations, if you choose, it can be used to do some things that we haven't yet adapted it for, but it certainly conceptually supports. So for example, this could be brought together with an overall statewide asset management exercise in which you want to compare and contrast the value of investing in one or another asset classes. How much should we be spending on our bridges? How much should we be spending on our pavement? How much should we be spending on our safety, and so forth and so on? By adapting this tool a little bit, each of those asset classes could become bundles. And we could see the benefit cost analysis from the investment, as well as see the effect of changing the emphasis on the different categories and how that would affect the relative standing or relative value of those asset classes compared to one another. Lastly, it can also be used to prioritize individual projects or investments. Again, in its current form, that wasn't the mandate from the Oregon legislature, so we didn't go there. But you can see clearly how, just as it could compare one or two or three or four bundles of investments, it could compare several individual investments to one another. And again, that would require some adaptations and probably some new screen displays, and not incidentally, probably a larger number of travel model runs, because each of those bundles would have to be, each of those projects would have to have its own travel forecast. But in that environment, it can be used to prioritize projects as well. I think that's our last slide. You can test me on that. And
Sam,
at this point,
Sam, this is Eric. I just wanted to add just a couple of additional thoughts on that, and I think you summarized it really well. And from the agency perspective, from the DOT perspective, again, we think this really is a new and innovative way to look and compare and contrast different values and costs and help provide that in a transparent way. But, you know, like with any tool or any process, trying to figure this out, this is very complex. This is a very complex set of equations and things that are in a spreadsheet Excel format. It does take a lot of data. So I encourage, if you're really interested in looking into this, to go to the website, look at that user guide to understand what is the type of data you're really going to need to run this process. And to get the most value out of it, that user guide will give you a lot of that information to help inform that. Again, it is adaptable. You don't have travel demand model, but if you do, your information will be that much better. For example, how good is your GIS demographic information, your economic information? All of that will help dictate how precise you can get and how much value you will get from this tool. But again, just like with any tool, you need to make sure you understand what are the inner workings and what are the results that are coming out, so you can dive down, like many of these diagrams and things are showing, to understand what are the drivers behind that. And does that make sense, and how do you explain that effectively to your decision makers going forward? And I just didn't want to gloss past that, because we walked through the tool pretty quickly in this format, and there's a lot more information that gives you a better flavor and feel for what it takes to run that, or run this tool and process as we go, or as you would implement that for a planning or a project process. So having that understanding and understanding where that information is coming from and how it's being used is very important. And again, this is meant to inform decision makers. It is not meant to provide a number to say, obviously the Mosaic process, that set of bundles or that project is so much better than that one. You obviously need to go there. You still need to bring your values, your goals and objectives for the specific situation to bear in that decision-making process. So just a couple of additional thoughts before we go to question and discussion.
All right. I want to thank our excellent speakers for giving a great presentation. This is a really powerful tool that we sort of looked over briefly today, and I think it has great potential. And I want to remind folks who may have joined the webinar a bit late that we will be posting a recording of the webinar today or tomorrow on the SSTI website. That's ssti.us. You can find out about future webinars and subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on Twitter at the website below. And we're now good for questions.
All right. So we've got a few questions in so far. Anybody who has any further questions, just enter them into your question box on the right side of your screen. If that has disappeared for you, then you can click the orange arrow icon on the far right, and that'll sort of open up that little question box. The first question we have is, did you have to determine how the projects rate for advancing your performance measures, and how did you do this? So, for example, how does active transportation affect economic vitality?
I think I'm going to understand your question. I'm going to paraphrase it to make sure I do. Mm-hmm. I think the question the questioner is asking about the various sketch planning models that operate in the background in Mosaic.
Right. Yeah. I think that's it.
Right. So this is where your own time spent looking at our user guide will be very helpful. But there are a half a dozen or more sketch planning models that are operating in Mosaic, in addition to Mosaic's needing to import travel model output from a regional or a statewide travel model. Each of the sketch planning models is designed to address a specific indicator. So, for example, we want to determine the monetary value of active transportation, and we looked around in the peer-reviewed literature to use and find the best sketch planning models that enabled us to do that. And when we found them, we embedded them in the Mosaic workbook. They are fully transparent. You can see where those models came from. You can see a link to the website if the website is a website citation or a report or documentation. Often be taken to that site. So we've used work that's been done externally, extensively, in order to make the connections for monetizing benefits or the connections for estimating one or another statistic that's needed. So that's a short answer to what is a very rich and important question, the question of how Mosaic makes all the connections, how Mosaic generates the estimates of value that stakeholders can then decide how much to weight, because that's really what powers the whole thing.
Interesting.
Lots more there for you, and offline I can certainly point you to any of that stuff.
One question that popped to mind as you were going through this for me is what categories have you found the biggest discrepancies between the monetized costs and the non-monetized community preferences? Like these types of indicators, say the value of time spent stuck in traffic. I was wondering if the people that were that played a part in valuing these things actually thought that was the most important thing, in the same way that the monetized value of that was very high.
Right. Well, as you might have noticed, I know I showed an awful lot. When we ask stakeholders to assign relative weights to 9 different categories of impacts, we find that they do put a weight on all of them, and that while the weights vary, all of those categories make a small but meaningful contribution to the overall score. Let me also add that if we had 10 stakeholders doing this, we might get a range of values. What we enter into Mosaic would be an average of that. That's point 1. Point 2, individual stakeholders could say, again, as I mentioned before, gee, what if we increased that value? I want to see what would happen if we gave that category 80% of the weight, because that's what I did, and I really think if we did that, we'd get a different answer. Well, easily in the spreadsheet environment, we can change that weight and then see it play through the spreadsheet. So stakeholders tend to weight all the categories in a similar way. By contrast, when we monetize things using the best available science, we find that the single biggest contributor to the roadway bundle is the value of travel time savings. And that's based on an estimate of the value of an hour of your time. The science behind that is pretty well developed. It's usually, it is in Mosaic, half of the average wage of the metropolitan area or the state. Again, users can decide what would happen, or they can ask what would happen if they wanted to weight travel time more than that, or if they wanted to weight it less than that, or if they wanted to weight it differently depending on trip purpose. Now, in all those cases, at some point, you may have to rerun your travel model, but probably not. Mostly, this is just an exercise in how to value time, and if you have travel output disaggregated by trip purpose, you can make this change shift in the spreadsheet. So the point I'm getting to is travel time is the dominant monetary contributor to the benefits of roadway investments. Conversely, the dominant cost, in addition to the capital and operating costs, is the additional motor vehicle use, which isn't always a result of roadway investments, but is certainly one of the results. And again, the science behind that is all documented in Mosaic. We use an average value of a mile of travel based on the AAA and so forth, and all that is evident. So I've talked mostly about the roadway bundle. As I mentioned and showed, when you look at other bundles, you see a different mix. But in no case do you get quite as balanced a set of weights as you do when you engage stakeholders in the exercise.
Interesting. And following on that, another related question we got here is, do you have to have results from a travel demand model, I guess, in order to run Mosaic, or are results just more limited without a model?
Results are more limited without a model, because without a travel model, basically we'd be turning off all the monetization and a lot of the quantification. And the exercise would basically come down to a MODA, a multi-objective decision analysis, in which we might have to qualitatively compare, for example, the safety benefits of bundles A, B, and C. We wouldn't have the results of a sketch tool that estimated the change in the number of accidents and property damage associated with volumes on different links in the network. All that will be put aside because we don't have any of the volumes. So we'd use a subjective process where you'd ask your public works director or whoever is appropriately qualified to make that professional judgment. The stakeholders don't make that judgment. They ask their professional staff to make the judgment, and if necessary, the staff use their own qualitative judgments and say, well, this bundle here we think will produce the most safety benefits because we're going to fix A, B, C, D, and E, whereas in this bundle here we're only fixing A and B. So if and where a travel model isn't available, you rely a lot more on your staff, on their professional judgment, and on the qualitative judgments and scores that they'll put on different bundles. And then you can enter into the weighting and sensitivity testing and see what results.
All right. And another one here, are the MODA and benefit cost analysis scores completely separate, or are the benefit cost results included in the MODA score? And I guess, is there one final score that combines those two?
In Mosaic, in the current form, based on the policies that were set by our stakeholders when we developed the tool, the two are kept separate, so that you get a monetized cost-benefit framework for something like 17 or 18 indicators, which we can monetize, and you get a MODA framework for another 20 or so indicators that can't be monetized. What we do advise is that you only weight those indicators that can't be monetized, because that way we get the cleanest comparison between the things that we think we can monetize using the best science and the things that we know people differ on, and so we're going to exercise the MODA process to compare and contrast them. There are ways, and there are certainly theoretical reasons why you might want to combine them. And again, in the future or even in the present, users could do that pretty easily with some very minor programming adaptations to the Mosaic tool. No matter how you use it, if the rules are transparent and everyone agrees to the rules, our philosophy is that that's an honest process, and that if people accept the rules, then they'll accept the outcomes. And I guess that's the reason we've enabled a great deal of flexibility in the way users actually could choose to use Mosaic if they desired.
Great. A question about the these goal groups. Are the indicators that are part of these unique to each goal group? For example, with environmental stewardship and the land use goal, I could imagine that some of the performance metrics could be overlapping in those two categories. Are they totally separate in Mosaic, or are some indicators used for multiple goals?
We never duplicate the use of an indicator, because we have, as a matter of policy and theoretical accuracy, a decision rule that says we can't double count anything.
Right.
So people might differ as to whether indicator 37 is really an indicator of environmental quality or land use. In the end, what matters is that we can help stakeholders see that the indicator that matters to them shows up in column 6 or in column 7, so that they know where to find it. But we have taken care, especially as a result of a peer review that we held for over a period of 3 months with people from the U.S. and Canada, to eliminate, as far as we're able, any double counting, and keep these categories as accurate as possible.
Great. And what sort of a time commitment is required to run Mosaic? Is this something that could be done in days, weeks, months?
So the answer from our perspective is that there's certainly more time involved in using Mosaic because it enriches the opportunities for conversation. So how much more time? We don't have a firm answer to that. It seems to me, I'll say 10 to 25% more time than might otherwise occur, in exchange for which you get a better investment decision and a stronger consensus for action. But that's a number that's my own professional judgment, and we are still in Oregon now moving into the next phase where we are going to be using this in a metropolitan decision-making process, and we'll see how this goes. You're going to use a travel model. If you have a travel model, you're going to use it with Mosaic. There's basically no additional time to preparing a travel model than would otherwise be used for the decision process. There may be a few kinds of data that take a little more time, and the staff could decide whether or not it's worth collecting it, because you can always say, well, we don't want to actually measure that with numbers. We're going to make a qualitative judgment, so we're going to move that over to the qualitative side, and we'll make sure we can keep on schedule. So best answer is it probably takes a little longer, in exchange for which you get a much better decision. One more point on that. Again, the reason it takes longer is that we provided, or we expect that there's going to be a richer discussion. And that discussion needs to be facilitated by someone who understands the tool, but also understands the people. And that would be again, your planners, your engineers, your elected officials, whoever are leading the group through that discussion. Play a really rich and important role in making sure that Mosaic produces the kind of results you like.
And Sam, that was going to be the part I was going to add on to as well. If you're doing a robust planning process, obviously there's probably some data formatting and things to put it into the spreadsheets the proper way that'll take some additional time. But that may not be really where you're adding a lot of time to your process. It's at the back end or even at the little bit of the front end of, what's important in evaluation and weighting, and then working through the results, because sometimes you get some results that wow, we didn't expect that. We need some help understanding this. What's driving that? And really diving into what's going on. We really encountered that with our test, for example.
Yep.
All
Definitely.
right. Do we have any more questions, Bill? All right. I think we're done with questions. I want to remind attendees that we will have the PowerPoint slides and the audio of this webinar up on our website by tomorrow. And thank everybody for attending, and I want to thank our speakers once again. Everybody have a great afternoon.